There are old books we cannot fully understand, and then there is the Voynich Manuscript, a case that sits in a category of its own. This is not a damaged fragment or a short-coded letter. It is a substantial illustrated codex with roughly 240 surviving pages, written in a script that appears systematic yet remains unread. The text flows left to right, repeats recurring word forms, and occupies pages in a way that looks intentional, as if the writer followed consistent habits. Alongside the writing are strange diagrams, plant-like drawings, astrological imagery, and sections with human figures. The result is a paradox. Everything about the manuscript's form suggests meaningful content, but the meaning itself has not been demonstrated. For viewers, the key is to separate intrigue from evidence. The manuscript is not mysterious because people have not tried hard enough. It is mysterious because serious, methodical attempts have repeatedly failed to produce a translation that others can verify. Start with the strongest anchor, material dating. Radiocarbon testing of the vellum places it in the early 15th century, roughly 1404 to 1438. That does not identify the author, and it does not guarantee the exact year of writing, but it does establish that the physical substrate is medieval. This matters because it rules out many simplistic claims that the manuscript is a modern fake created for sensational value. The codex also shows signs of planned construction, including fold-out pages and section-like organization, which implies deliberate design rather than casual fabrication. Some pages appear missing, indicating the manuscript we have may be incomplete. Missing leaves are not a minor footnote, they can remove prefaces, keys, indexes, or contextual clues that would have made interpretation easier. So the basic situation is already constrained. We have a genuinely old object and partial evidence. Any strong theory must respect those two conditions rather than ignore them for a dramatic narrative. Stylistic analysis has often pointed toward an Italian Renaissance context for production, though that remains an informed inference rather than a signed certificate of origin. Even as a hypothesis, it is useful. It situates the manuscript in a world where manuscript culture, learned circles, medical and astrological traditions, and symbolic visual systems were all active. In other words, it could plausibly be a technical, intellectual, or hybrid work built for a narrow audience. At the same time, stylistic clues can be ambiguous. Artistic motifs travel across regions, scribes imitate older models, and manuscript conventions overlap between domains. That is why dating and style are foundations, not solutions. They define the landscape in which the manuscript likely emerged, but they do not reveal authorial intent. The best way to use these clues is as boundary markers. They narrow what is plausible while leaving room for multiple competing explanations that still need textual proof. The ownership trail offers another layer of grounded context. The first confirmed owner is George Baresch, a 17th-century alchemist in Prague. By his time, the manuscript was already old, which means unreadability was likely not a modern invention. It had already entered a phase of uncertainty. Centuries later, in 1912, rare book dealer Wilfrid Voynich acquired it, and his name became attached to the codex. That naming can distort perception. Voynich did not create the manuscript and did not solve it, he was the pivotal modern conduit who brought it to wider attention. Since 1969, the manuscript has been housed at Yale University's Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library, and in 2020 Yale made the full manuscript available online. This digital release transformed access. Researchers worldwide could inspect the same high-quality images instead of relying on selective reproductions. Access increased dramatically. Consensus did not. That gap between data availability and interpretive agreement tells you how hard the underlying problem really is. The visual content is both a clue and a trap. Many pages show botanical forms that do not map cleanly to known species, celestial or zodiac-like structures, and diagrammatic layouts that imply internal categorization. There are also pages with human figures in unusual compositions, often interpreted through medical, alchemical, or symbolic lenses. The temptation is to force a direct modern label onto each drawing and then back-calculate what the text must say. That approach usually fails because ambiguous images can support multiple narratives. A better method treats illustrations as structural context rather than literal captions. If visual sections are genuinely thematic, then language patterns should shift by section in detectable ways. Some analyses do find distribution changes in word forms across different parts of the codex, which supports the idea of topical segmentation. But segmentation alone does not decode semantics. It tells us there is order, not what that order means. The manuscript keeps giving us medium confidence signals while withholding high confidence interpretation. Now focus on Voynichese itself, the label for the unknown script. Researchers have noted properties that make it look language-like: repeated tokens, positional tendencies, and non-random looking line behavior. Yet it also departs from expectations in ways that complicate direct classification. Some patterns seem too regular for ordinary prose, while others do not fit familiar cipher footprints. That split is why major hypotheses diverge. One camp argues for an encoded natural language, another for a constructed language system, another for a cryptographic transformation with unusual mechanics, and another for pseudo-text generated to imitate meaningful writing. Each hypothesis captures something real in the data but struggles elsewhere. If it is natural language in disguise, why no robust decipherment despite extensive work? If it is advanced ciphering, where are the expected breakpoints or key artifacts? If it is pseudo-text, why such sustained structural discipline over so many pages? The script resists reduction to a single simple category, and that resistance is central to the puzzle. The manuscript's reputation is also shaped by who has already tried to solve it. Professional and amateur cryptographers, including notable codebreakers connected to 20th century wartime efforts, examined it without producing an accepted decipherment. Names often cited include Prescott Currier, William Friedman, Elizabeth Friedman, and John Tiltman. Mentioning these figures is not an appeal to authority for its own sake. It is a calibration tool. If experts trained to break difficult systems could not deliver a reproducible reading, then casual one-page decode claims deserve immediate skepticism. In this field, a valid solution cannot rely on isolated cleverness. It must produce stable mappings across large portions of text, align with manuscript structure, and survive independent replication by other analysts. Most proposed solutions fail because they are too flexible, rules change when needed, translations appear after interpretive stretching, and contradictory passages are ignored. The core standard is simple and brutal. If the method cannot consistently predict readings before interpretation, it is not a decipherment. Consider the natural language hypothesis in detail. It remains plausible because historical writing systems can appear alien when detached from their cultural context, and because multilingual settings sometimes produce unusual orthographic conventions. A hidden language model could also explain recurring word forms if those forms encode common grammatical or semantic units. But plausibility is not proof. To become convincing, this hypothesis must identify consistent symbol-value relations, demonstrate grammatical behavior across sections, and generate interpretations that align with illustrations without forcing them. So far, no candidate language has met that standard comprehensively. Some proposals produce striking local matches, but local matches are easy to overfit in long unknown texts. A handful of persuasive lines is not enough when hundreds of lines remain unstable. Another issue is transparency. Methods that rely on opaque transformations can always be tuned until they output meaningful-looking phrases. Scientific confidence rises only when independent teams using the same method reach similar results on unseen passages. That convergence has not happened yet. Now examine the cipher hypothesis. Secret writing was real in pre-modern Europe, and a restricted technical manuscript is historically imaginable. The codex format, sectioning, and apparent internal logic can support that intuition. But practical cryptography usually leaves analyzable fingerprints once enough text survives. Classical substitution and transposition systems, even when mixed, often reveal exploitable regularities. The Voynich text has resisted those routes in unusual ways. Some researchers respond by proposing highly sophisticated layered encryption, but that introduces a historical and practical burden. Who built such a system, for what audience, and why preserve only the encrypted artifact without an operational key? It is not impossible, but each added layer of complexity requires additional evidence. A competing interpretation is that the text may have been generated by a method that mimics linguistic structure without carrying full semantic payload, which would naturally frustrate cryptanalytic assumptions. The cipher model remains on the table, but simple versions have not succeeded, and complex versions risk becoming unfalsifiable. The hoax or pseudo-text hypothesis is often misunderstood as a claim that the manuscript is trivial. In reality, even a pseudo-text model can involve high craftsmanship. Producing hundreds of lines with coherent-looking repetition patterns, paired with organized imagery and fold-out layouts, is labor-intensive. So if this is a deliberate non-decipherable composition, the creator still had a strong motive, whether performative, intellectual, symbolic, or social. The challenge is evidentiary symmetry. Proponents of meaningful text must explain the absence of reproducible decoding. Proponents of pseudotext must explain the depth of structure and sustained effort on expensive material. It is possible the manuscript sits between modern categories, meaningful to a specific initiatory or private framework yet effectively undecodable outside it. That middle possibility avoids both extremes, but it also remains hard to prove. We are left with a recurring lesson. The most dramatic answer is rarely the best one when the archive is thin and every theory must carry unresolved constraints. Digital humanities and machine methods have expanded what we can test. With full image access through Yale's online library, researchers can run large-scale pattern analysis, compare section-level token behavior, and model potential encoding schemes faster than ever. This has improved the quality of questions. We can better identify which claims conflict with basic statistics and which hypotheses remain structurally compatible with the text. But computational sophistication does not eliminate the ground truth problem. Without a known bilingual anchor, signed provenance note, or independently validated plaintext segment, models can optimize for pattern fit without proving semantic truth. In plain terms, an algorithm can find structure and still be wrong about meaning. The realistic role of modern analysis is cumulative constraint building, removing weak ideas, refining plausible ones, and defining what a true solution would have to satisfy. A genuine breakthrough will likely require convergence across methods, material evidence, and replicable translation results, not just one compelling output from one model. So the best current conclusion is disciplined uncertainty. The Voynich manuscript is real, medieval, and intentionally constructed. It likely emerged from a learned environment, yet its script and semantics remain unproven. That is not failure, it is an honest state of knowledge. The manuscript reminds us that historical evidence can be rich in form and poor in explanation at the same time. We can observe the artifact in extraordinary detail, map its internal regularities, and still lack the missing bridge that turns pattern into language. For viewers and researchers, the value of this mystery is not only the chance of eventual decoding. It is also methodological. It teaches how to reason under ambiguity, how to resist premature certainty, and how to demand replicable standards in a field vulnerable to sensational claims. If the Voynich puzzle is solved one day, the winning explanation will not merely sound convincing. It will work consistently, survive independent checks, and make the unreadable finally readable. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.